Shalom, brothers and sisters. This is Dr. William Schnoebelen coming to you from With One Accord Ministries with another Treasure Guardians teaching. Over the last year and a half, 2 years that we've had this channel, we have been teaching about how believers in Yahushua, followers of Yahushua, need to keep the Torah. In addition to having saving faith in Yahushua, they need to keep his commandments. And we've done quite a few videos on the scriptural proofs for this. We aren't going to go into that today. However, as a result of that, we have had many people contact us and say, okay, you've made your case. How do we do that? How do we keep the Torah? Because this stuff is not taught unless you go to a synagogue, a literal Jewish synagogue. You don't hear about this stuff in the church, period. The only thing you hear about from the Old Testament in the churches is tithing. So make of that what you will. So the question becomes, if we are a disciple, a talmid, as it means, the Hebrew word is to be a taught one, a talmid, a follower of Yahushua, how do I walk as he walked? How do I follow in his footsteps? Because that's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to follow him. That's what he said to all his disciples, come follow me. So how do we do that? Well, I imagine the vast majority of people that are watching this video that are concerned about this topic are what most people would say Gentiles. You know, they're probably not ethnically Jewish, which is fine, you know. That being said, they don't know a lot about what to do. And so what I would like to do is take you through the response of the early congregation, the early kahal, the ecclesia in the book of Acts to Gentiles coming into the church. Because, you know, we need to understand that that originally the entire church was Jewish. There were no Gentiles in it, period. And over the years, beginning, of course, with Peter and Cornelius, which we aren't going to get into that today, they began to come in, Gentiles, Romans, Greeks, Syrians, whatever. And this was a very important thing to happen. So because of that, as many of us know, there was a controversy which was addressed at what is commonly known as the Council of Jerusalem. And this took place in Acts 15, and Paul was there, and, you know, the two sides, so to speak, presented their arguments, and then James, who was the head of the church. Peter was not the head of the church. James at that time was the head of the congregation. He was the half-brother of Yahushua, and he was the head of the Jerusalem church. So he basically said this, and we look at Acts chapter 15 just to go to the end of the statement he made. He says, wherefore, my sentence is that we trouble them not, which from among the Gentiles are turned to Elohim, but that we write unto them, that they abstain from pollutions of idols, and from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood. For Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. Okay, so what do we make of that? Well, as I mentioned, the vast majority, even after the Cornelius incident, the vast majority of believers were Jewish. And for them, the Torah was just a part of their life. You know, it was, you know, part of every day. You know, I mean, if you understand what it really means to follow the Torah, it impacts every part of your life, just as faith in Yahushua should impact every part of your life. It's not something you take and put on a shelf for 6 days out of the week, and then you go to church and you put on your holy thing, you know, and all of a sudden, poof, you're holy, and then you go out, you know, Sunday night and have drinks or whore around or something. No, it's part of every part of their lives. So they knew what the Torah was. They knew it like the back of their hand, most of them, especially the ones that were likely to be following Yahushua and his his disciples. So, because of that, the James and the other elders of the church realized that the Gentiles who were coming in were clueless. They knew nothing about the Torah because, they were probably, pagan idolaters. They were worshiping, Zeus or Apollo or Diana or whatever the various pagan Elohim might be. So, what this means is that they gave some basic, if you will, cliff notes of how to start keeping the Torah. And what did James say? Let's look at this carefully, because people gloss over this and think they understand it. And what you have to understand is that in the milieu of the New Testament ecclesia, the James and all of the disciples understood that this is what it means to keep Torah, and this is what some of these phrases meant. Today we need to kind of have them decoded a little bit. So the first step is, it says abstain from idolatry. Well, that means the worship of any false Elohim. So we don't, and most people think, well, yeah, fine, I'm not worshiping a statue, unless of course you're a Catholic, I'm not bowing down to idols. So that's okay, that's fine. But it can also mean don't put anything in your life above Yahuwah. So in other words, if money is more important to you than the kingdom of heaven, that's idolatry. If, whatever it might be, your job, your golf game, your football, anything like that, a hobby, if that's more important to you than the almighty creator of the universe, then you are an idolater, even if you're not like, bowing down to a statue of Buddha or something like that. So that's idolatry. Now, then James says, abstain from fornication. Now, that's fairly straightforward. It basically means fornication is a general rule in the scriptures that means any kind of sexual immorality. Some people, I know when I was first a believer back in the 80s, it was commonly taught in the churches I was in that meant sex outside of marriage, whereas adultery obviously means where you're being unfaithful to your spouse or something like that. Well, fornication means all forms of sexual immorality. It means, adultery. It can also mean, having sex outside of marriage where both parties are single. It can mean homosexuality, it can mean bestiality, it can mean masturbation, it can mean anything like that. All of those things are unrighteousness before the throne of Yahuwah, and believers need to abstain from them. Okay, the next thing he says is abstain from things strangled. Now, people might say, what the heck does that mean? Well, here's the thing. In the Torah, we are told not to eat blood, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And because of that, the way that, if you're going to eat meat, the way that the animal, the cow or whatever, I suppose you could do it with a chicken or with a lamb or something, no matter what it is, the animal had to have its throat cut and all the blood drained out of it. Because Israelites that follow the Torah are not supposed to consume blood in any way, shape, or form. Now, again, that doesn't mean blood transfusions. We're not like Jehovah's Witnesses here, but I just want to say that as a sidebar. But we're not supposed to consume blood. So if you happen to be somebody who likes blood sausage and you want to follow Yahushua, got to give up your blood sausage. So anyway, that is what this means. If you strangle an animal, which was frequently done on the altars of the pagan Elohim, then all the blood is still in the animal's body. And even if you obviously to eat it, you have to cut it open and pull out the organ, whatever you're going to eat, you're still going to have blood in it because, and I don't mean to be gross here, but, when you cut a living animal's throat, the heart is still beating for a few, and if anybody's ever cut open an artery accidentally, those things, they really spurt because there's a lot of power in that heart muscle, whether it's the heart of a cow or the heart of a sheep or the heart of a human being. So, if you just strangle the animal, and no matter what else you do, there's still going to be blood in the meat you're eating. So that's why we're not supposed to eat things that are strangled. Even if you're a Gentile and you're working your way into the church, that you're not supposed to do that. Okay. Then we have, he also says, and abstain from blood, which I kind of already covered that, but let me explain what all this means. Contrary to what the typical pastor will tell you, this means that for Gentiles, to whom this statement is being addressed by James, they are to keep kosher, because the whole prohibition about not eating blood and about avoiding things that are strangled, animals that are strangled, is part of the kosher dietary rules. And they can't get away from that. So it is implicit, if it's not explicit, but it is implicit in this scripture that converts to the body of Moshiach need to keep the kosher dietary laws. And we'll talk about what that is in a couple minutes. I'm just wanting to go through these verses right now. So, there you have it. You're to abstain from fornication, from idolatry, and you're to keep the dietary laws, including especially don't eat blood. Okay, now, what about, and people say, well, okay, we can kind of live with that. I can give up my blood sausage for the Almighty, but there's more. Christians always stop at that verse, but they don't read verse 21. James says, for Moses, of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. Now, why is that important? Well, Moshe is the great lawgiver. He gave the Torah, and if you were to go to either a Messianic congregation or even just a regular Jewish congregation, you would find that every Shabbat they will read publicly from the Torah. And the typical custom is to go through the entire Torah in 1 year and then expound upon that. Just like if you go to a Christian church, they'll read some Bible verses and then hopefully, and then the pastor will expound on those verses and teach from those verses. Well, the same thing happens in both Nazarene congregations and also in regular Jewish congregations. So here's why this is critical. What they are saying is that you are to go. James is saying that you as a new believer, a Gentile, are to go, notice, every Sabbath day to a local synagogue. And back then, all throughout, Israel, Judea, there were synagogues in any significantly sized city. Even Nazareth, which was a fairly small town where Yahushua was raised, they had a synagogue. So the counsel that is being given by James is that you are supposed to go to every Sabbath to the synagogue. Now, implicit in that is the idea that you're to keep the Sabbath, and we'll talk a little more about that in a minute. But you go there and learn more. So in other words, Moshe is the words of the Torah, which is what that means. It's a metonymy. It means that you are to go to the synagogue and hear the words of Moshe being read every Sabbath, and gradually learn how to do the rest of it. These were the basics. This is like entry level, for lack of a better word, entry level Christianity, or Torah 1.0. And then the more they would go, and they would be discipled by the congregation, and every Shabbat, and we'll get into a little bit more of that later, but they would learn. And gradually they would take upon themselves the fuller yoke of Torah, which Yahushua said, remember in Matthew 11, his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And you will find rest for your souls in the yoke, his yoke of keeping Torah. So, now, with that in mind, if you're listening to this as a new believer, what does this mean for you? What do you have to do practically to get started on this path of following Yahushua? Well, here we go. Number one, and this should kind of be a given, but you need to keep the 10 Commandments. And most people say, oh, well, that's fine, I can see that. But also the fourth one, because almost all churches today will teach the 9 commandments and skip over the fourth one. Or else they say the Sabbath is on Sunday. Nowhere is that either implicit or explicitly stated in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, that the Sabbath was somehow magically moved to Sunday. The Sabbath is an eternal covenant between Yahuwah and his people. If you are one of his people, you keep the Sabbath. It's not rocket science. So what does that mean? Well, basically it means that we are to remember the Sabbath day and to guard it. The word there is shomer, which means to guard it, to keep it secure. And how do we do that? We do that, number one, by abstaining from work. Whatever we do for a living, whether it's, being a doctor, being a lawyer, being a carpenter, it doesn't matter. You avoid doing that on the Sabbath. And you devote the day to your family, to studying the scriptures, to prayer, to praising Yahuwah, because he gave you this day as a remembrance. And I'm going to read the passage right out of the 10 Commandments so you understand what it's a remembrance of. Okay, so going to Exodus 20, starting in verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the 7th day is the Shabbat of Yahuwah thy Elohim. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son nor thy daughter, thy manservant nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger which is in thy gates. For in 6 days Yahuwah made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore Yahuwah blessed the 7th day and hallowed it. So we see here the idea behind the Sabbath is it's a remembrance of the fact that in 6 days our Heavenly Father made the heavens and the earth. So if you are a creationist, which I would hope you are if you're watching this video, I am not an expert at defending creation. That's not really part of my ministry, but I very much believe in the 6 literal days of creation because nothing else really makes sense. In fact, that's also why I'm a flat earther. But in any event, the point is, it's a commemoration. It's a way of remembering every 7th day we recall that Yahuwah is the creator of the universe, that Yahuwah created us, and out of gratitude for his creation of us and for his saving our souls, that we remember this one day of the week, we guard this one day of the week. Now, you'll notice there in verse 10 of Exodus 20, it also says that your maidservant, your manservant, they're not supposed to work either. Now, most people, and this is an area of, the word is halakha in Hebrew, which means rulings on how one is to walk. This is a step away from the actual scripture, but the idea is that if your maidservant and your manservant aren't supposed to work either, then today, since most people, unless you're really wealthy, don't have maids or manservants, it means you can't go out and pay someone else to work for you on this day. And a lot of people, and again, this is a matter of prayer, will say, well, that means we can't go shopping because you're basically making other people work. Because I'll tell you, I'm old enough to remember when stores were closed on Sunday in America, where there were very few stores that were open on Sunday. Because, of course, back then, Christians thought Sunday was a Sabbath, and they kept that rule. They actually had what were called blue laws, which meant it was illegal to open your store on Sunday in a lot of states, especially in the Bible Belt. Now, that's all done away with now. There are a handful of stores like Hobby Lobby, that's a Christian organization, that close their stores on Sunday, and I give them points for that, even though they got the wrong day. At least they're trying. Bless their hearts. So, the point is, if you really want to take this literally, it means don't pay other people to work for you. Don't go out to eat on the Sabbath, because then you're paying the cooks and the waitresses to serve you. So that's part of it. Now, here's one other thing. Some people will say, well, my job requires me to work on Shabbat, and that's a very real concern because as I said, nowadays our culture totally disregards these things. Most places now are open 7 days a week, and that includes, of course, Saturday. So, what I tell you is see if you can find a workaround. A lot of employers will be willing to find a way to work around that, because if you say, okay, I want to keep the Sabbath and I believe it is Saturday, they'll say, oh, this is a guy or a woman of integrity. They might be really trustworthy. If they care enough about their faith, that they're wanting to be serious about this, they're probably going to be devoted workers. They're probably not going to be stealing from the till. They're probably not going to be goofing off on the job. And also this means you, on the other hand, if they do give you this grace, so to speak, to not have you work on Saturday, then you in turn have to be a good example the rest of the time and not be cussing and swearing or, stealing money or something like that. Yah forbid. So anyway, a lot of employers are willing to work with that. And if not, well, Yahuwah understands. But I would suggest maybe trying to find a different job. And I know that's easy for me to say, because sometimes jobs are hard to find depending on the field you're in. But do your best. Now, one other thing I want to say here, and that is, if you are a health worker, if you are a nurse or a doctor or an EMT, a first responder, or even a fireman or a policeman, all of these people that I have just mentioned, especially the healthcare workers, these are people that are in life and death situations. And of course, hospitals have to stay open 7 days a week because people do get sick on Friday night or Saturday. So if you have a job like that, if you're a nurse or a doctor or a CNA or a fireman or anything like that, you're exempt from this, because you will see even in Israel where they take the Torah more seriously. Well, sometimes. Anyhow, the point is you will see healthcare workers, ambulances and things like that running, and people, getting to help people that are in accidents, or else they've been, blown apart by terrorists, Yah forbid, the kind of thing. They will work on Shabbat because it's a matter of life and death. And that takes precedence over the Shabbat, just like Yahushua would heal on a Sabbath. And he says to the Pharisees, which of you, if you had a donkey fall into a pit, would you not bring the donkey out on Shabbat? Well, in the same way, to save a human life, or to heal a person that's grievously sick, or whatever it might be, or to save someone out of a burning building, those things are permitted. And just to bear that in mind, if you happen to be in one of those professional categories, and if you are, bless your heart, because it's very important work. Okay, now the next thing we recommend is to abstain from idolatry. And again, I kind of explained a little bit about that, but I would just say that means not only, don't bow down to idols, don't put money or job or anything material above your Heavenly Father, and don't act like they're more important. Because some people say, oh, I put G-D first, and then they turn around and they steal from somebody, or they cheat someone in a real estate deal or whatever they might be, and that's a terrible witness. When you do something like that, you're taking Yahuwah's name in vain, because you're naming the name of Moshiach, of Christ, on yourself if you say, I'm a Christian. And if you turn around and cheat people, or if you, Yahuwah forbid, if you go out and you have an affair, or if you visit prostitutes, or if you're secretly a homo or something like that, that is a terrible desecration of the name of Yahuwah. It's partly what it means to take Yahuwah's name in vain. So, that can be idolatry too. If you've got a girlfriend or a boyfriend, quote unquote, on the side, and you're cheating on your wife or your husband, that's idolatry just as much as it's adultery. So anything like that is idolatry. But also, idolatry is keeping pagan feasts. So we're talking about Christmas, we're talking about Halloween, we're talking about Easter. All of these things are pagan feast days, and you should stop doing them. because those are honoring pagan deities, pure and simple. So stop doing that. That would be part of abstaining from idolatry. The next thing, and this is kind of the converse of what we just said, is keep his feast days. Keep the feasts of Yahuwah. These are not Jewish feasts, quote unquote. These are the feasts of Yahuwah. And briefly, you know, we have already some teachings on our YouTube channel about how to do these things, and in fact, for Passover, we actually have a Nazarene Haggadah, a Nazarene, in other words, Messianic Passover service that you can download for free off our website. Just one example. We're going to try more of those things. We have like how to do Hanukkah. We have some other teaching. We're going to do more of those as the months progress, because we're getting near, as this is being done in mid-July, we're getting near the fall feasts. So you need to keep Passover, Pesach. You need to keep the days of unleavened bread. You need to keep first fruits. You need to keep Shavuot, the Feast of Pentecost. You need to keep Yom Teruah, the Day of Blowing Trumpets. You need to keep Yom HaKippurim, which is the Day of Atonements. And finally, you need to keep Sukkot. There's 7 feasts. Notice that Yahuwah seems to always like to do things in 7. And there are some additional things that are not in the Torah, but a lot of Jews like to do, like Purim and Hanukkah. Those are optional. But the 7 feasts, they're in the Torah and they're obligatory. You should do your best to keep them. Now, let me say one other thing before we go further. There are some of these things that we can't do because, number one, we don't have a temple. Number two, we don't have a Kohanim, a priesthood set up. And number three, we're not in the land of Israel, most of us. I imagine a few of you that are watching this might be in Eretz Yisrael, but most of you are not. And so a lot of the commandments in the Torah we cannot do. It's not our fault. But the ones that we can do, we need to do. So, that being said, the next thing we advise everybody to do is keep kosher. What that means is don't eat swine flesh. In other words, don't eat pork, bacon, that kind of stuff is out. And also, don't eat shellfish. There's a long list of these kosher and non-kosher animals in the book of Leviticus, but to keep it simple, because most of the stuff that's not kosher, nobody eats anyway. I mean, nobody in America eats bugs, I don't think. Nobody eats vultures. Nobody eats eagles. You know, if we eat fowl, we generally eat, you know, either turkey or chicken or maybe squab or quail or something like that. But basically stay away from pork and bacon and shellfish. And that's a very good beginning in terms of the diet. Now, a lot of Jews will tell you, oh, you can't eat cheese with meat. That's bogus. That's a rabbinical thing that's based on a commandment in the Torah that says, thou shalt not see the kid in its mother's milk. That's really stretching that in a rabbinical ruling to say, okay, you can't have cheese with meat. Because the Jews will even say you can't have chicken with cheese, which is pretty bizarre because chickens don't even, you know, give milk. They're birds. They're not mammals. But, you know, that's why, well, in a lot of ways, it's good to follow what the Jews have been doing down through the centuries. They have guarded the Torah very carefully. There's some of their stuff that's kind of way out in the twilight zone. And you need discernment from the Ruach, from the set-apart spirit about that stuff. And again, we're going to get more into this as we progress throughout the year. Okay. Finally, we recommend to really study the scriptures, study the Torah seriously. And, you know, if you can find a Nazarene congregation, a Messianic, you know, congregation, they're called different things, but basically a congregation where they believe in Yahushua, but they also keep the Torah, that would be a great thing if you're near one, but many of us aren't. I mean, you know, the nearest one where we are is like over 90 miles away. So we just have devotions at our home. So, you know, the point is study the scriptures and if possible, And of course, you can always fellowship online. I mean, you can follow us on YouTube. We're going to have more and more teachings on this. There's other, people out there that are worthwhile. And we hope to down the road have a listing of them on our website that we kind of endorse. But, for now, just really drill into the scriptures, read the Torah portion for the week, read, the prophets and the Psalms, and just immerse yourself in these things. And of course, read the New Testament too, certainly. But most Christians, a lot of the Torah is kind of terra incognita. They don't really know much about it. Now, that is what we recommend. So to summarize, keep the Ten Commandments, including the Sabbath, refrain from idolatry and pagan feast days, keep Yahuwah's feasts, and again, we have some teaching on that. We'll have more to come. And also, keep kosher, no pork, no bacon, no shellfish. And also, study the scriptures. Study the Torah, study the prophets, study the Psalms, study the New Testament. And you will do well. And you will begin to have more and more growth in your spiritual life if you do these things. And if you can find a good congregation, great. Consider yourself blessed, because many people have trouble finding those things, especially if you're away from a large urban center, because obviously there's more of us, meaning more Jews, whether Messianic or otherwise, in big cities like New York or Chicago or LA than there are in small communities. So that's what we recommend. If you want to walk as Yahushua walked, realize he kept the Sabbath. He kept kosher, because if he hadn't done those things, he would have been breaking his Father's commandments, and he would have been an imperfect sacrifice upon the cross. Yah forbid. That was not the case. He kept the Torah perfectly. And if we follow him and ask him to help us, we can follow him right into the Torah, take on the yoke of Torah, which he says is easy and his burden is light, and it will give us rest for our souls. That's my prayer for you, that you would immerse yourself in the scriptures, immerse yourself in the Torah, and find rest for your souls in these turbulent times, because these are very turbulent times. But in Yahushua, there is shalom. In the Torah, there is shalom. And so that's why I always leave you by saying shalom. Again, if you find these a blessing, please subscribe. Please share this YouTube video. And please pray about supporting our ministry with your financial gifts. Thank you very much. May you be richly blessed. Shalom, shalom.